Thank you for the invitation to be here. I'm going to give you a bird's eye view of some of the work a company I work for has been doing in terms of adapting to climate change, monitoring, and especially cooperating and sharing our activities. So this is a family-owned company that has been around for 70 years. We own vineyards in 7 of the main wine regions in Portugal, but also in other countries such as Spain, Argentina, Chile, and New Zealand. So we do have a good idea about what terroir is. And terroir, as it has been defined and postulated by the International Organization for Vine and Wine, it has got to do with constant interaction between the characteristics of the place, of the territory, and the practices developed therein in order to create taste. So terroir is actually about identity. And this identity has got to do with the way that this species, the grapevine, harnesses sunlight and water and nutrients and transform them into compounds that are sensory active and give us aroma, flavor, taste to the wines we like. Of course, when the system becomes unbalanced, we have a number of effects that start to shift the expression of that terroir. And that is when the identity of the terroir becomes challenged. Actually, that's when terroir loses its most important letter, the letter that stands for identity. And this has been quite noticeable in the last 3 years in Portugal. For instance, in 2016, we had severe damage from hailstorms. 2017, we had wildfires ravaging through our vineyards. And last year, in an unprecedented situation, we had a low temperature spring and summer together with a lot of rain, being followed in just 3 days by one of the most extreme heat waves ever. And this has affected the identity of our terroirs. So this is the level of challenge that we are facing as producers of wine in the face of climate change. So some strategies have been devised, and this is something that we have identified not just 3 years ago, but actually almost 20 years ago. And we started deploying that strategy roughly 10, 11 years ago. First of all, by setting monitoring systems like weather station networks, by initiating cooperations, of which we have a good example here with our panel host 9 years ago, of which I'm going to refer a little bit more later. We deployed research. We analyzed the data our sensors network were gathering, and our cooperations were giving us the tools to analyze, and we started also sharing and publishing this information. And finally, we started acting upon this knowledge that we were getting in terms of implementing new practices, new ways of managing viticulture production, winemaking, and even wine communication. Last but never least, we have been doing a great effort of sharing our practices, our results with a number of other actors at the national and international level. Here also it's important to point out that for us this is a very important aspect of what we do. We consider that when you plot sustainability in function of diversity, there is a moment for balance, and that if you deploy a little bit more towards less diversity, you become more efficient, but you lose resilience. So that when you want to have a sane and sustainable viability, you need to be in the balance between both. So if we think of what was viticulture in this country 40 years ago, in the 1970s, we would probably be still using traditional approaches that have been time-tested. They were quite resilient, but not very efficient. So from then onwards, up to about the 2000s, we did a lot of work towards achieving efficiency, but we may have overdone it a little bit, because we became very efficient, but we have lost some of the resilience we had. So the challenge now is cycling back a little bit so that we achieve the necessary resilience to have sustainability for the future. And in order to address this, the first and foremost thing was to establish what is our bottom line. So we have analyzed our sustainability situation, and we have published a sustainability report with reference to year 2017. I'm, of course, not detailing everything. It's an extensive report. It's available online. It's totally readable. Here are just a few numbers that relate to the economic bottom line, the environmental bottom line, and the social bottom line. But establishing a bottom line is just not enough. You have to establish goals. And that we have done. We have set for 2022 a set of goals that have got to do at the same time with mitigation of our footprint on different aspects, but also adaptation. And these are the ones that are highlighted here, as you can see, in terms of defining the way we work with our grape suppliers, the investment we do in research, the way we are willing to prepare for climate change adaptation for each region, and also on other matters like water conservation and waste management. So, in terms of monitoring, the data produced by our weather station network has been considered relevant enough to starting to be used for international climate drift. So we have partnered with the Royal Dutch Institute of Meteorology, who manages for the World Meteorological Organization a data set for the evolution of climate across the world. In this case, I'm showing here it's Europe, and this is an evaluation of the areas in Europe with years with ideal conditions for growing Chardonnay. So the red areas are the areas that on a 20-year period had close to all of the years with those ideal conditions, and the blue areas are the areas that only about half of the years had those ideal conditions. So if we now move to the next 20-year interval, as you can see, there is not a big difference, but then things start to change. And by the 20-year period between 81 and 2000, we see a definite move towards northern latitudes, and even more if we move to the next 20-year period. So we are seeing a loss of areas with ideal conditions for this grape across many parts of southern Europe, and a gain of conditions to produce wines with it on areas that before we didn't have. This same type of analysis can be done with pretty much any grape variety, and we have the data to do this even with varieties used only in certain countries like in Portugal. Further on, we also have been monitoring the effect climate drift is having on the quality of the grapes we produce. This is a 25-year data series grape quality analysis in the Douro Valley for variety Tinta Roriz, also known as Tempranillo. And we can see that we have a very well-defined trend to increase sugar levels, hence alcohol content, but especially a very steep increase in this specific case of this variety in pH levels, coupled with a reduction of acidity. So this is another aspect that is affecting and pressuring on the expression of the identity, in this case in the Douro Valley. At the same time, we use remote detection technologies to evaluate every year how is the development, the vegetative development of grapevines across our vineyards being affected, and how can we, and how successful are the countermeasures we are using for those. So this was monitoring, but we have also been applying actions in our production systems. One of the oldest adaptation measures was the adoption of integrated production methodologies across all of the 860 hectares we own in Portugal. Integrated production is a system of production that has a consideration in terms of different aspects of the impact we have in the environment, coupled with the economic viability we need to keep the business going. So as you can see, there are a number of practices regarding the way we use plant protection products, but also then things that have to do with soil erosion, soil health and management, also the choice of plant material, biodiversity, and so on. This is an international recognized system. In some other areas, it goes under different names. In Oregon, for instance, it's known as the Low Input Viticulture and Enology System. In France, Haute Valeur Environnementale or Production Raisonnée. So this is a fairly well-adopted and quite sensible system, of which I believe the most important thing is that it is evolutionary. Every year, companies certified under this system have to have their staff trained on every novelty that comes available, so that the system keeps improving its performance. We also have evolved towards the non-use of herbicides in our vineyards, mostly on the inter-row area, and using more tillage rather than herbicides. This achieved a reduction in 50% of tractor passes, with the inherent reduction in fuel consumption and carbon emissions. We have been using, it's been already mentioned here, also biobeds to use natural processes like biological degradation and evaporation to degrade effluents from sprayings, and actually breaking them down to their constitutive elements that become nutrients and can then be composted to use, while recovering the water through evaporation into the system. Also, in terms of using water, it must be said that almost 70% of our vineyard acreage is dry farmed. We only use irrigation as a tool in those areas where otherwise we cannot achieve a balanced production and the safety of the plants themselves. But even there, we use water in a very parsimonious way. First, we assess the need for water on the plant itself, and not through environmental indicators like evapotranspiration, for instance. So we measure the actual need of water in the plant itself, and that translates in the use of the minimum possible quantity of water for the maximum possible effect in terms of quality, mostly. And In terms of research, we have been doing a lot of work in these last 15 years. I'm just highlighting 2 or 3 examples here. This is an interesting project we have partnered with, developed by 2 by 2 universities in Portugal, about the present-day effect of ozone in the atmosphere for the Douro region, and also the potential evolution of this gas in that area's atmosphere, and for 2 dates in the future, 2050 and 2100. This has been converted into an atlas of the region that allows every grower to understand what is the risk posed from ozone into their production, considering that ozone will interfere in physiological processes of the plant. We have also partnered with the Porto University in making high-resolution models of slopes to understand which are the areas that present landslide risks and where we should act in terms of conducting water when we have events of very high rainfall in a way that preserves soils and avoids landscapes. But maybe in terms of adaptation, what we have done, which has a stronger effect and has a greater contribution, is the cooperation we have developed since more than 20 years now in creating tools and knowledge that is cooperatively shared among all economic agents in the sector. You have seen that picture with our panel host, Professor Greg Jones. What you are seeing now is the result of that work done, completed actually, on 2011, and that has resulted in this WebSig platform that any grower in Douro can assess and quantify in terms of rainfall, in terms of growing season average temperature or maximum temperature, or growing degree days for their specific area, as this has been done at a very high resolution of 1 square kilometer, what is going to happen there and what are the decisions they should make when choosing grape varieties, choosing rootstocks, deciding if they need or don't need to have irrigation in their areas. Present-day work we are cooperatively developing is a partnering we have established in the framework of Horizon 2020 project, which is ongoing right now, Project Met Gold. We have partnered with 2 other important sectors of agri-food in the Mediterranean, the sector of olive oil and the sector of durum wheat to make pasta. And we are working together with some of the most relevant climatology and modeling centers of Spain, the United Kingdom, Italy, and Greece to improve climate tools, especially improving the predictability of weather over longer terms than we are used, meaning here seasonal terms like 6 to 9 months, and then decadal terms from 10 to 30 years. This is meant to improve the accuracy of the predictions, the spatial resolution of those predictions, but also the temporal resolution of the information we may have in order to manage our decisions. Maybe the most important, and going from what Kim was just showing us in terms of using grapevine diversity, maybe the most important work is something that started in this country 40 years ago, when researchers from our universities started looking onto the diversity of the grapevine, not just the diversity in terms of different varieties, of which, granted, we have a lot. We can use 343 varieties in our country, 116 alone in the Douro region, but most especially looking at the diversity inside each variety. Because the fact is, when you change a variety in a region, again, you lose identity. You change the way your wine expressed there. Now, what we have seen from that work is that actually you do have, for many varieties, a capacity to adapt to different situations within the same varieties, just by changing the clones and not really changing the variety. What you see here in this graph, for instance, is a representation of the diversity of 40 varieties. They are listed here a little bit too small to read, but the shape of the curve informs you on the variety. The wider the curve, the wider is the diversity within the variety, and the greater is the capacity it's got to adapt. This works with any characteristic that can be quantified in the grapevine: productivity, sugar levels, acid levels, but also, and maybe most relevant for us, the capacity the grapevine has to manage leaf temperature through the efficiency with which it uses water. This was done with 257 genotypes of Aragonés, which is also another synonym for Tinta Roriz and Tempranillo. And we have seen that we consistently have genotypes of this variety that cannot regulate temperature very well, while others can actually regulate it with higher efficiency. The difference in leaf temperature between these two sets being about 4 to 5 degrees. And this is a huge help in terms of adapting our production systems to climate change. Finally, we understand that it is important not just to work cooperatively, but also to share the results of what we have been doing. And sharing also means to submit what we do to the scrutiny of third parties. And that we have done at the national level. This is one example. The only region in Portugal that has a sustainability program right now ongoing, and we achieved the highest level in 2015. But also at the international level, the only international award for sustainable wine growing, which is managed by an institution in the United States, of which we also achieved the top award, well, this year, or very early this year. So, main takeaways here. If I was terroir, yes, I would indeed be terrified. The pressure, the challenge is daunting. And this is a disruptive situation, meaning we cannot go and look onto the past to find solutions for what is coming. We have to have resilience, we have to have capacity to withstand the shocks and the variations that our systems are going to suffer. In this process, no one can afford to be left behind, because they will surely perish, but also because they will drag the others that want to move forward. This needs to be a collective effort. In our company, we have started a long time ago on doing this. We have done a lot, but we are quite conscious that we still have a lot to be done, and we are prepared to move on doing it. And in this, I personally believe that no better ally can we have than the grapevine. The grapevine has been around for at least 50 million years. It has undergone very challenging situations and has created adaptation capacities to that. So this is a good friend we have, and considering that, as this quote from Jason Box, we are in the age of consequences, it's high time we start doing it. Thank you very much.